Welcome everyone to the Luminary Live by Lightwave Logic. I'm Robert Blum, SVP of Sales and Marketing. Earlier this year, we launched a new newsletter on LinkedIn where we hope you're already following us and subscribing. We're now expanding that platform into live conversations with our team, bringing you updates from the experts as we reach important milestones. Today, I'm joined by Manoj Manjare, our Director of Reliability. Manoj recently returned from the IEEE Optical Interconnects and Packaging Conference, or OIP, where he gave a talk on one of the questions that matters most as AI reshapes the data center, not just how fast our technology can go, but also how long it can last. Manoj, welcome. I want to spend some time today unpacking what you shared on this important topic of reliability. But before we get into that, why don't you give us a little introduction to how Lightwave Logic is augmenting silicon photonics and leveraging its maturity and scale to enable very high bandwidth modulators, very compact modulators. Manoj, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me. I had a great time at OIP. Yeah, just to give you an introduction, what we do, we have our electro-optic polymers, class of polymers that we call Perkinamine, and what they are a special kind of class of polymers which change refractive index as a response to changing electric field. This effect is called Pockels effect, and basically the way it achieves that is that we engineer our molecules to be this long molecules that are dipolar, and that allows them to have this ability to change refractive index as a changing electric field. This changing electric field, the response to that with our electro-optic polymers is really fast. It's in terahertz frequency, and that's already been published. So if you can use this electro-optic polymers in AI chips, it will solve a lot of problems. The way we kind of, to answer your question, how we leverage maturity of silicon photonics, basically you can use foundries that are already mature with their silicon photonics architecture, and they already have these designs that they can do. And you can go in and put your electro-optic polymers in those designs, and it augments their performance to the next level and solves a lot of problems that silicon photonics already has.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? So we leverage basically the silicon photonics ecosystem, and they're able to etch these slots, waveguides, and then together with the polymer and the encapsulation, it just becomes part of the standard PDK, so that designers can essentially leverage all the existing designs they already have, and then insert these very high-speed modulators. So the encapsulation obviously is a key part to making these materials reliable. And in your talk, you drew some parallels to the OLED or organic light emitting diode industry. So maybe you could switch to that and explain what happened with the OLEDs early on and what the industry did to address those early reliability challenges.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting story with OLED industry, and we can draw a lot of parallels from what happened in the OLED industry to what we are doing right now. I don't know if you remember, but in early 2000s, there was a big promise from OLEDs. They had like perfect contrast, really high refresh rate. They promised everything, but they had a lot of problems. You knew, like they had short lifetimes, so you'll have burn-ins. You'll have an image that is already permanently printed on your screen with OLEDs. You had moisture sensitivity. If the moisture got in, you would get like these dark areas in the screen. So the whole industry was very reluctant to adopt OLEDs. Because of the reliability challenges, even though the performance was matched by none. But the way they got over it is by studying each and every fail mode and studying the physics of it and engineering the solutions for those particular failures. So what we kind of try to do is try to understand what those fail modes were and how they engineered the solutions. One of the biggest fail mode was this triplet annihilation. But basically, in a normal working LED, you'll have an excited S1 state, which is around 2.8 electron volt. And then when it goes to a ground state, it will emit a light, the light that's designed for that LED of that wavelength. And that's all well and good, but then there are other species, like they're called triplet states, that are somewhere in between this excited state and ground state. And those are basically very long-lived, much longer than the S1 state. And because they're long-lived, the population grows. And when the population grows, there is a more probability of them colliding with each other. And when they collide with each other, you get some of them going to really high excited state, so much higher than this S1 state that they have really high energy. And that energy is so high that it can actually cleave the chemical bonds of the OLEDs, of the diodes. And once you break the bonds, you kind of get a dead pixel. And then you get dead spots, and those dead spots keep growing, and then you get a fail. The way they engineered around it was very clever. What they did is they introduced another material, and they call it exciton scavenger. And what they do, and they put it in like a tandem layers and vertical stack. And what they do is they absorb these long-lived triplet states. So the population never gets so much that you get hard states to break the bonds. So that's how they engineered around this particular fail mode. There was another fail mode called polaron exciton quenching. And it is very similar to what happened with triplet exciton, but now this triplet actually attacks the host polymer in which the OLEDs were prepared. And it's basically a similar thing where you attack a host polymer molecule, ground polaron, where it gets to excited hot polaron, and it has enough energy to break the chemical bonds of the host polymer. And the way they worked around it or found a solution for it was just a little bit different. What they did is they engineered their host polymer to have a really high band gap, and that high band gap allowed them to never break because of hot bonds. The next fail mode, which was I think the biggest and most important one to solve for the industry, was moisture sensitivity or moisture ingress. And what happened is whenever any moisture gets inside and gets in contact with the cathode of this diode, the cathodes are made of usually metal, and then they react with the water molecules, and then they form hydrogen. And when you have hydrogen gas bubbling under there in the layers separate. And when the layers separate, then there's no electrical conductivity, your diode is dead. And again, you get those black or dark spots or defects. So this was solved basically by innovation in ALD technology. And once you developed a specific ALD engineered around protecting this stack up, you then basically have what we have here. Once you solve all of these kind of technological problems, you have the most advanced displays in the world that last hundreds of thousands of hours. These are the displays that are in your pocket, smartphones. You don't have to worry about their displays like that. You can drop it in the water, or you can leave it in the car in hot sun, and basically nothing happens. So really clever engineering to solve those problems.
This is great. Thanks, Manoj. So obviously encapsulation is key, but also, the chemical bonds and the oxidation processes there are important. So, could you maybe highlight how that carries over to electro-optic polymers and what we have been doing to address?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What we're trying to do here is take drop parallels from this and learn from the OLED industry and how they solve the problems. And what we are trying to do here is similar, is first understand what the fail modes are in our electro-optic polymers, and then engineer the solutions around it. So we've identified the four main modes of failure in electro-optic polymers. First one is depoling, and depoling is caused by temperature. And basically, what this means is the deorientation of electro-optic polymers, and we'll go into a little bit more detail of what that means in the next few slides. But basically, temperature makes the chromophores lose alignment, and this happens as you approach TG, which is the glass transition temperature, and I'll again explain that in the next slides. Then there is chromophore decomposition. Again, with temperature, what can happen is if you heat it beyond certain temperature, which is called decomposition temperature, it can break down the chromophore bonds, the chemical bonds. But those temperatures are typically much higher than what you would encounter in a typical process or lifetime of chromophore. And this can actually be accelerated if there is oxygen present. Oxygen itself can accelerate a couple more fail modes. So there's something called fail mode called photooxidation. And what happens in photooxidation is you have oxygen and light combining together to form a singlet oxygen, and that can actually break the chemical bonds. And then there's polymer photolysis. If you have really high energy photons, typically higher than 3.8 electron volts, which has very deep UV, so around 280 nanometers of UV light, which again is not a big concern because you don't encounter this in a typical process or application. So these are kind of the fail modes, and we're trying to address each fail mode and engineer solutions around it. I'll go a little bit more detail into each fail modes now. To understand depoling, we first want to know what poling is. And how we do poling is, to start with, you have electro-optic polymers. The molecules are all randomly oriented. So even though each molecule will have its own electro-optic effect, the bulk material will have a zero electro-optic effect because everything cancels each other. So in order to get bulk electro-optic effect, we heat up the polymer up to glass transition temperature. And what that means is the polymer becomes more softer and softer, and so that each molecule has more mobility to move. And at glass transition temperature, you apply voltage, and in response to this voltage, the chromophores can align themselves. And while we apply the electric field, you start to cool down the polymer so that the alignment is locked in. And once you cool it down, you remove the voltage, and then the chromophores are frozen in place. And then over time, because we are not anywhere near glass transition temperature, you get very little reorientation of the polymers. The key requirement here is that even at operating temperatures of a typical transceiver, which is around 85 C, you get negligible depoling. And with operating wavelengths of light, you get high photostability. So that's kind of what poling means. The depoling is actually just in reverse without the applied electric field. If you apply heat and time, usually the chromophores or the molecules would like to go back into their random orientation, and we want to prevent that. And there's lots of research around this phenomena, and we studied it. And this is there's a graph that shows that depoling speed is directly proportional to the difference between the glass transition temperature and the temperature that you're using the chromophore at. And the higher that difference is between the glass transition temperature and your operating temperature, the less depolling you get. And what we did is we actually solved for this equation, and we found that if you want to survive more than 10 years without significant depolling at 85C, then what you get is you need a TG that is above 164C. So that's the minimum difference that you need to survive more than 10 years at 85C. What we've done here is we've engineered our chromophores to have 185C or more TG, which gives you much bigger margin than what you actually need. And then what we did is we performed reliability thermal stress on these chromophores, on our chromophores. And what we found is our chromophores actually match or even better the slope that was reported, so that we are very confident that it will last much longer than 10 years at 85. And then let's talk about photostability. So I said that photon in presence of oxygen can actually be damaging to chromophores. And the way that happens is actually very interesting. You have photons that are absorbed by chromophore, which are around 1 electron volt or 1300 nanometers. And that gets that creates what's called triplet oxygen into singlet oxygen. And the singlet oxygen, as you would recall from our OLED story, is damaging to chromophores. And what they do is they attack our chromophore, bond with the chromophore bridge molecule, and it breaks them. Once there is a triplet oxygen going into singlet oxygen in the presence of photon, it is going to break the chromophore. The way we monitor this is we take a spectra of our chromophore material, and we monitor it over time, and it has a signature at lambda max. There's a particular wavelength where it shows a peak, and if that peak doesn't change over time, then we know that the chromophore is intact. But if that peak goes smaller and smaller, then we know that the chromophore is breaking. And what we observed, and as expected, if you expose a chromophore to a bunch of light without any protection, this lambda max peak goes smaller and smaller and smaller over time. And then we know that the chromophore is damaged. So what we did here is engineered around this fail mode. We designed our own encapsulation designed for this application, and we tested with this encapsulation with the same amount of light. And what we observed is generation after generation, our encaps is just getting better and better. And without encapsulation, you can see that same peak that we track dies within a few hours. But with our encapsulation, there is no change. With our latest encapsulation, there is zero change. So we've done a really great job in developing the encapsulation to protect it from oxygen. So this is a thin film data, right? We wanted to try this also in devices. So we stress few devices with a lot of light. And what we found is in nitrogen environment, when we put a lot of light through chromophore, there is no damage to chromophore even after 1400 hours. So yeah, we in theory, we prove that if there is no oxygen present, no matter how much light you put through the chromophore is intact. And we do put the encapsulation like we did in thin films. We know that even in oxygen present, there is no damage.
Right. So that's very encouraging, right? Because we know that the material is reliable, and we know when you encapsulate it that it is stable and, doesn't degrade under light. And then earlier this year, we also showed some data on actual devices, that were submitted to very harsh conditions. So maybe you could go into those as well. I know you talked about it in your talk.
Yeah. I mean, this was our biggest breakthrough in reliability yet. What we did is we took our fully encapsulated silicon organic hybrid devices, and we put them in in what is called 8585. And what it means is we put it in an oven which is heated to 85 degrees Celsius and 85% relative humidity. So it's a very harsh condition that we put our devices through, and we monitored their VPI for 2,000 hours. And we put not only just one design, but we put three designs in the same chamber to monitor their VPIs over 2,000 hours. And all three designs with three different active lens show no change in VPI. So this was a big breakthrough because it was a real condition in presence of oxygen, in presence of humidity, and at high heat, and we see no change after 2,000 hours. So it was really great, and we kind of prove not only to the industry but to ourselves that this technology is ready for mass production and mass adaptation. So just to kind of wrap it up, went through our OLED journey, and we learned that the OLED industry in general studied the fail modes and they engineered around them to solve each and every problem. And we kind of drew parallels from that. So like moisture and oxygen ingress, they developed an encapsulation based on ALD. We did the similar thing, and we developed our own ALD deposition on EOP, electro-optic polymers, and that passes 8585 to show that it works. Thermal instability, similar. They developed guest house matrices. They put scavenger species and developed high band gap materials. And we did the same thing. We developed our own high TG material that does not decoil at 85C. Photo oxidation, similar thing. For photo oxidation, they introduce oxygen scavenger materials to beat up those oxygen molecules or the extons. And here we developed our own ALD barriers that have ultra low oxygen transmittivity. Photolysis is the same thing. There are wide bandgap materials that OLED industry deployed so that the extern never has enough energy to break the chemical bonds. We also developed our own chromophores that are very highly stable at the operating wavelengths, which is typically 1310 or 1550. So the photon never has enough energy to actually break the photon chemical bonds. So to just summarize, we have a polymer, we have the technology to introduce it into silicon organic hybrid chips. We've developed our own backend of line and encapsulation, and then we performed lots of reliability, telcordia reliability to show that our electro-optic polymer is not only performing well, but also its reliability is passing all the standards. And right now, what we're doing is we are working with different fabs with their own PDKs so that we can introduce our electro-optic polymers into their foundry lines.
Right. This is great, Manoj. Thanks so much. Right. So indeed, there's multiple tape outs in progress where we're taping out devices, and we're also together with customers, and we're also transferring our process to a high volume foundry to do the what we call back end of line deposition and encapsulation as well. So very exciting times, and we look forward to seeing some of these 400 gigabits per second, but actually also some 200 gigabits per second modulators for LPO with very low drive voltages very soon. So again, thanks, Manoj, and also thank you everyone for listening today, for joining us on the Luminary Live. This was our first edition of this new format, and if you haven't done so yet, please follow us and subscribe to the Luminary on LinkedIn, so you don't miss what's next. See you soon.
Thank you.